Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, then please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Andy Lopata. Andy is the author of 6 books on networking and professional relationships, including the Financial Times Guide to Mentoring. Andy is also a fellow podcast host on the Connected Leadership podcast. Andy, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Michelle. Great to meet you. Well, you've introduced me perfectly there. So my specialist area is professional relationship strategy, helping people to understand how they can build, nurture, and leverage the relationships they need in order to make their career successful or to achieve their objectives in business, whatever it may be.
Okay, so with your books on how to build networking and professional relationships, how do you actually do that?
In terms of how you take a strategic approach to professional relationships,
Yeah.
the first thing is you take a strategic approach, and that may sound flippant, but the challenge is that most people understand the power of having the right people around you, the people to turn to for support, for ideas, for introductions, to influence on your behalf, whatever it may be. But we don't treat it as seriously in terms of planning and taking the actions required to build the right network as we might do with other things. Part of the problem is the word networking, which I do actually typically avoid using to a large degree because people see networking in quite a negative way most of the time, but also as soon as you hear the word networking, you think of walking into a room full of people and exchanging elevator pitches with them. And that's not what this is about. It's about taking a thoughtful approach to saying, what am I trying to achieve? Who do I already know who could help me? And would they want to? And who do I need to know that I don't know yet? And having a very strategic or thoughtful approach to building that right network while remaining authentic in the way you connect with people, so they don't feel networked by you. They don't feel that you're manipulating them or using them. You come at it from an abundance mentality where you'd be as happy to help them as they would be with you. But you do focus on building the relationship and asking for the help when you need it.
Okay, but a lot of people maybe not want to, if you are networking and you've got like maybe quite a good network, a lot of people would be, if they're needing help with something, maybe looking for a job or looking for a job or getting some job leads or anything like that. A lot of people would be maybe hesitant to ask them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the biggest challenges. I think there's 3 main reasons we don't ask for help. Number one, we don't want to be a burden to other people. But then think about the last time you helped someone that you like and how it made you feel. You probably felt positive about it. Most people do. So we have a disconnect. We don't ask for help because we don't want to be a burden, but we get pleasure from helping others. So actually what we're doing is we're denying people the pleasure of helping us. As long as A, those are people we have a relationship with, and B, we make it easy for them to give that help. The second reason we don't ask is because we don't want to be seen as vulnerable. And what that does is it's confusing vulnerability and weakness. It's seeing vulnerability as a weakness. You can look weak in the way you ask for help. Oh, no one will employ me. I'm really struggling. I don't have the skill set. Can you help me find a job? Sounds weak. But I'm really excited about the prospect of working with a specific energy company. I would love to work there. I think I'd be a great fit for them. I know you know someone who works there. Would you introduce me? That doesn't sound weak. It comes from a position of strength. But vulnerability isn't weakness. Vulnerability is a strength. Saying, I would benefit from your help. It takes strength to ask that. And it gives you strength because you get closer to your goal with the help of other people. That makes you stronger. And the third reason we don't ask for help is because we assume people don't want to help us or can't help us. Don't assume, let the other person decide for themselves, but just be okay with a no. Communicate to them that it's okay to say no, but communicate it to yourself as well, because we take that no as a rejection when in fact that's our ego getting in the way. That's making it about us. But actually, someone might say no because they don't have the time. They might say no because they're not sure how to help you. They might say no because of their own imposter syndrome. There could be a range of reasons they say no that are nothing to do with you. So we have to get over ourselves and our ego in dealing with that no as well.
Okay, but then we'll go over the no. Is it better to ask people for help then?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, if we make it easy for people to help us, they get the pleasure of giving us that help and seeing us succeed. And we get closer to our goal with the help of other people. So it's a win-win. And let's say, for example, let's take your example of looking for a job. If I know that you know the person I want to work for, and you have a good relationship with them, and I'm the right person for that role. If you make that introduction, I'm going to be grateful to you. You're going to feel good about that. And if I'm the right person for the role, the person who's recruiting is going to feel grateful to you. So it's wins all around. Everyone's happy and everyone feels good. So yes, we should live in a society where people are not just happy to ask for help, but it's our first thought. Yes, you need to do certain things on your own first, but you can still get help and support in doing that. But it's a natural thing to ask for help. That's what we need in society because we would be so much more closely aligned if we did so, and everyone would be more successful in achieving what they wanted to.
I think so too, but how do we network then? How do we get these connections? Because it is difficult, even if you're going through LinkedIn.
Yeah. So, my primary piece of advice, if you're starting from scratch, so if you're not starting from scratch, you have a network already. And most people have some kind of network already, personal or professional. But let's say you've moved to another part of the world where you know nobody at all and you're starting your first job, so you have no network in place. The primary piece of advice I would give anyone is to go in to find people you like, to seek people who you would want to spend time with rather than just going to find the person that's going to hire you or introduce you or whatever it may be. And there's a really simple reason for that. People don't want to be networked. I think I used that phrase earlier on. They don't want to feel that you're only connecting with them and engaging with them because of what you can do for them. If you build a relationship with someone, they want to help you. If you go straight into a complete stranger and see what they can do for you, they'll want to run as far away from you as possible. So, how do you build a network? You go out to find friends, and you can do that. You can use LinkedIn as a site, but so if you were to use LinkedIn as a platform, you would use maybe hashtags to search for key areas. Oil and gas might be a hashtag energy sector. I'm not sure what the hashtags would be. And you see what the discussions and the posts are under that hashtag, and you
Mhm.
start engaging in them. And you start engaging, don't just send out mass connection requests, start engaging in the conversations. And don't just say great idea or I agree, but put something thoughtful there, that word thoughtful coming up again, so
Mhm.
that people respond and you get them in conversation. And if you have a good conversation, then you could send them a personalized LinkedIn connection request. So make that relationship evolve to the point of connection rather than going straight in. It's a bit of a tired analogy, but it works. It's the difference between walking into a bar, seeing someone you're attracted to, and walking up and saying, "Hey, should we go back to mine?" Or walking up to them and asking, can we have a drink together and let's have a conversation and getting to know them. It's, as I say, it's a bit of a tired metaphor, but it works. You are courting people. But it doesn't have to just be a online like LinkedIn. If you are in your area, whether it's socially or professionally, there are various meetups, networking events, conferences, walking groups, social groups where you'll meet new people. And it's about, so here's the second big tip. The first is not to go straight for the what you need, but build the relationship. The second is to follow up, because it's where so many people fall down. You have that first conversation and you just think, well, that's it. They're in my network now. I can move on to the next person. And when I need this person, they're sitting there waiting for me. It doesn't work like that. I have a model of the 7 stages of professional relationship. And we need to move from where we see networks as binary, you're in my network or you're out, to where we see the journey people go on once they come into your network. So they go from recognizing you to knowing you, understanding who you are, what you do,
Mm.
to liking you, to trusting you, and then into what I call the sweet spot, supporter or advocate. A supporter is someone who, if you need their help, you could pick up the phone and they'd help you. An advocate, you don't have to pick up the phone. So, in the example that we're working with, a supporter is someone who, Michelle, I could pick up the phone to you if you're a supporter and say, "Hi, Michelle, I'm looking for a new job. Could you help me?" And you'd say, "Yeah, what could I do?" If you're an advocate for me, you'd be talking to someone and you'd say, "Actually, you know who'd be a great member of your team? Andy. Would you like me to introduce you?" So you're recognizing opportunities for me when you're in conversations I don't even know are happening. And then level 7 on the 7 stages is friend, when you go into personal network as well. But what we're really looking for is to create supporters and advocates. So, in terms of building a network, it's not just thinking about building the numbers in the network, but building the depth of the relationships with people as well. And follow up is key to that.
Okay. So how do you build people that are going to help you, advocates?
You engage with people consistently and frequently. You focus on their agenda more than yours. 80% of your outreach is about them. So let me give you an example. I regularly get messages on my LinkedIn from LinkedIn connections that say, "Hey, Andy, we haven't spoken for a year, so I thought I'd tell you what I've been up to." I didn't ask. A much better message is, "Hey, Andy, we haven't spoken for a year. What have you been up to?" So it's about that, where your lens is. Are you only focused on yourself, or are you focused on the people in your network? People are going to respond to people who are interested in them, not in themselves. So how do you build it? You focus on them. I saw it was a letter to the Times that was in the Week magazine this week, and it was all about planning. This may sound really dry, but there's a purpose to this. It was all about planning challenges in building cycle routes in a part of the
Mhm.
UK. And a friend of mine wrote a book all about the cycle network in the UK and all the issues around it. So I took a photo of that letter and I sent it to her and I said, "This might be useful if you haven't seen it."
Mhm.
It's what I call, I saw this and I thought of you. That took me seconds. Now, Laura and I already have a really good relationship, but you can do that. So I didn't have to do that for relationship building purposes. We have a strong relationship already. It's just a nice thing to do. But you can use that very strategically where you're building relationship, and particularly where what you send is something that isn't just obvious based on their job title, but it's based on something they said to you in conversation. It shows you're listening to them, and listening is a really key skill. So building on that, the next thing you use is curiosity. And this is all tied together. You can see how not being focused on your own agenda, listening to what they're saying, and curiosity, they're all part of the same thing, which is focusing on the other person, not yourself. But if you are genuinely curious when you engage with people, the conversation comes alive and it's easy to build a rapport. So the traditional networking dance that I touched on earlier, where we meet at an event and you say, "What do you do?" And I tell you, and you listen patiently, waiting for me to finish so that I can then ask you, "What do you do?" And you tell me what you do, and we smile awkwardly and go our separate ways. That's not embedded in curiosity. It's embedded in politeness, courtesy, lack of imagination. You want a conversation to come alive. So just try and connect with people on a human level, and then relationships will build from there.
Okay, but it is sometimes, especially with the younger professionals, it is really can be really difficult to keep a conversation going, and maybe not to focus more on them rather than what they're after from the other person.
But that's exactly my point. If you focus on the other person, it becomes easier to keep the conversation going because if you're genuinely curious, you're going to be listening more intently. If you're listening more intently, you're going to pick up on what they're saying and you're going to have questions so the conversation can build. Put your own agenda to one side for that initial conversation and focus on building the relationship. What you need today will probably be what you need tomorrow and next week. And if you ask in a week or a month as the relationship has grown, they're going to be more likely to want to help you. So the best ever analogy for this was Stephen Covey. So Stephen Covey wrote a very famous book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And in Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, he talked about emotional bank accounts. He said that relationships are like bank accounts. He said you don't walk into a bank and say, I want to withdraw £100 if you haven't deposited it in the first place. And relationships are the same. So you need to deposit into the relationship first before you seek to withdraw. So when you first meet someone and they're the perfect person for you, unless that's an urgent need, invest in the relationship first. Now, there is a caveat that I add to Covey's emotional bank accounts, and it's this, that I can pay £100 into a bank account in London near where I live today. I could fly to New York. I could go into a branch of Chase Manhattan Bank in New York, a completely different bank, later today, and I could withdraw the equivalent amount in dollars. The two banks might not be part of the same organization, but they're connected by a network, and human beings are the same. So if I invest in my relationship with you purely with what I can get back in mind, that's going to be transparent and you're going to see that and you're going to be less likely to want to engage with me. You want to engage with people who like you because of you, not because of what you can do for them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a nice feeling to feel that people are only spending time with you because they want something. So what I need to do is invest in you as part of that banking network, part of my personal network. I'm investing in my network as a whole. So I might help you or invest in my relationship with you, but I might get back from someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that if I build a network of people that I have invested time in, I've got to know that I've developed the relationship with, if and when I need help, I know I can turn to that network for help and support. It just might not necessarily be a quid pro quo. So don't keep score.
Okay. But then, because when I was because I was at the offshore Europe recently, and I was talking to some of the younger professionals, and some of them even find it very, very difficult to go up and approach a senior person with more experience than them, because I think they think that they wouldn't know how to start a conversation, keep the conversation going, or even just think that they wouldn't have the time of day for them. How would they go over that?
Yeah, that's a very common problem, very common challenge, very common question I get asked. There's a few things to think about here. Number one, that senior person is a human being with all of the frailties and the fallibilities and the issues and the challenges and the questions that we all have. So don't just put people on a pedestal and think they're superhuman. They're not. They're human beings. I was at an event many years ago where the chief executive of a well-known shoe retailer was the speaker. And I needed to speak to him. And when he finished his talk, I went up and had a conversation with him. And then I went back to my table, and the woman I was sat next to, called Heather, as the speaker David walked past our table, Heather was looking at him, and under her breath, I heard her muttering, "Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me." And I said, "Heather, what are you doing?" She said, "I want him to talk to me." I said, "Well, why don't you go and talk to him?" She said, "He won't want to talk to me." And I explained to her he had driven from Kent, and I'd ascertained where he lived in our conversation. He'd driven from Kent to Birmingham, it's about 200 miles, I think, Kent to Birmingham to deliver a talk and then go home. And I know as a speaker that the loneliest place on the planet for a speaker is when you've just finished a talk and no one wants to come and talk to you. I said, "Do you think he's driven all that way and he doesn't want any conversation. Go and talk to him. And when I left shortly after, they were deep in conversation. But what she'd done is put him on a pedestal because he was this successful CEO of a big, well-known brand. And she didn't see herself there. She used to play sports for England, by the way. You know, she was no slouch herself, but it was that imposter syndrome kicked in. And that's what we're talking about to a degree here. So the first thing is to recognize that they're human. The second is I see young people who seek too hard, they try too hard to impress senior people with their knowledge. So they come up and they engage in that conversation, trying to show they know everything. That's not going to impress senior people. What's going to impress senior people is an appetite to learn. You know, it's that word again, curiosity, that we talked about a few minutes ago. So asking intelligent questions. Don't approach them expecting them to say, why are you worth me talking about what have you achieved in your career, and I have to outline how brilliant you are. Instead, show how intelligent you are. And you show how intelligent you are by asking intelligent questions. If you know that person is going to be there, you know you're going to have the opportunity to talk to them, do your research. Find out if they've posted something on LinkedIn recently, or if it's in a large organization, there's been a town hall and they've shared what their focus is at the moment. And show that you've done your research when you approach them. So going up to them and said, look, I was really interested what you said about this. Can I ask you a question about it? Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People, said, and I'm paraphrasing, the sweetest sound to any man is the sound of his own name. If you go up to that senior person and you say, I read your piece on this, or I heard you talk about that, could I ask you a question on it? And ask an intelligent question. You've got them. They're going to be engaged. And then it's back to what I said earlier, and follow up with them. Connect with them on LinkedIn, but write a personal note. Thank you for your time at that event. I really enjoyed our conversation. Would you be happy to connect here? Send them a note a few weeks later saying, do you remember that advice you gave me? I did this. I just wanted to say thank you again. So it's following up. You know, I said earlier, consistency and frequency, then you build that. But if you just go up and try and talk to them peer to peer, then it's going to be a tough conversation. If you acknowledge the difference in experience and seniority and perhaps life experience while not putting them on that pedestal, that's where the sweet spot is for me.
Okay. I can see where you say that you shouldn't really put them in a pedestal, but during my own podcast, and I've spoken to some incredible people, including yourself, of course.
Thank you.
All the people I've spoken to in my podcast have been amazing. They're really knowledgeable. And you can see how you can tell by talking to them how they are so successful. That can be, can still be, if it's intimidating to me, it would be intimidating to quite a young professional, I would have thought.
It will. And I understand that. But that's why I say, understand they are human beings. And let me give you an example from my own experience. So I'm a professional speaker. It's one of the key things I do. I'll stand on stage and I will deliver to a room of over 1,000 people quite happily. I say quite happily, I'll come on to that. And people come up to me, and fear of speaking in public is one of the greatest social anxieties. I co-authored a book many years ago called And Death Came Third, based on a New York Times survey of social anxiety, where death came third. The top two fears were walking into a room full of strangers and speaking in public. These are the two things at the core of the work that I do over the years. And people will say to me, how do I overcome nerves when I speak in public? And when I tell them that I am nervous before I speak and when I start speaking, they don't believe it because they don't see it. But if they knew what was going on inside me in the build up to a big talk, you can't see it on stage. I don't shake and shimmer, but it's going on. And so they'll look at me, the literal pedestal, I'm on a stage in front of 1,000 people, and they'll be thinking, they'll be intimidated about the thought of talking to me. But I'm a human being up there who has been in my head before I've gone on stage is why would they want to listen to me? Why have they brought me in? And look at who else is speaking at this conference. They just want to hear the next speaker. They don't want to hear me. Will I remember my words? Will I remember what I want to say? So all of these things, narratives are going through my head. And the point is, I'm a human being. And everyone you meet, think of the most successful people in the world. Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift has something in her life where she's not sure. She doesn't feel confident. She's worried. Things are not going right for her. Now, we don't see that from the outside, but I promise you, Taylor Swift has something in her life that does not go well, and she doesn't know how to deal with it because she's a human being, and we all have that. And I think that's the important thing to remember, because we have to take people down from that pedestal. We still respect them. We respect the work they've done. We acknowledge that, but we don't treat them like a Greek god that we can't approach. But we're respectful in the way we do approach them, and that respect includes respect for what they've achieved.
Yes, that leads me really nicely on to the next question, which I could appreciate as well, actually, because I was at the Offshore Europe earlier on this year, and I was really nervous, really nervous. I didn't think I would be so nervous. It was the first speech that I'd ever given in front of a whole room, and I didn't think there was that many people there, but I think there turned out to be nearly 100 people there. But how do you get over your nerves? I was scared. I was scared, I have to tell you.
If you're giving a presentation, the best advice I ever got was from my co-author on Death Came Third, a guy called Peter Roper. And I had given a talk at Wembley, I think it was either Wembley or Earl's Court a week or two before. And I'd been thrown because it was in a big exhibition, and it was one of the side rooms, and there were 120 people, 130 people in the room. Now, this is the very beginning of my speaking career. And the speaker before me, overran. So I came into the room, and I normally like a chance to walk around the stage and get a feel for the room. I didn't have any of that. I literally went to the front. I had some props. I got down behind a lectern and I got the props out, and I stood up ready to start. And I just saw 120 pairs of eyes staring at me, waiting for me to start. And I didn't know what to say. I just froze. And Peter's advice to me in that moment, or when I shared that moment with him a week or two later, was always know your opening lines. Always know your opening lines. Because what I find, and this is what Peter taught me, is that once I've got started, the nerves go down. Once I'm in my group, and you probably found the same. It's that core moment at the beginning that's the worst, because you need to get moving. And then to give you a couple of other tips around it, beforehand, you're going to have the imposter syndrome raging, potentially. That's what I have, that I talked about before. Remind yourself what you've done before or why you're there. And remember that unless it's an actual competition, it's not a competition. You're not being scored for this. People are there to learn from you and to understand some key concept from you. So when we look out at people, we think they're judging us, when in fact they want to understand something that we are going to share. And probably the most important tip I can give, and we've talked about 100 people in the audience, we've talked about 1,000 people in the audience, it's academic, it doesn't matter, because each one of those people only listens to you as an individual. So you are talking to 1,000 individuals or 100 individuals or 10 individuals. So we are currently having a one-to-one conversation, which might be heard by many, many others, and I hope it is. But I'm having a one-to-one conversation. But if we're currently recording this virtually. If there were 6 people on the call, I would probably engage in exactly the same way, but 6 different people would feel as if I'm talking to them when I do it. If there were 60 people on the call, if there were 600 people on the call, everyone experienced it once themselves. So try not to present, converse,
Okay.
have a conversation with individuals. And if I asked you a question about your podcast, for example, you could answer that question to me quite comfortably. Well, A presentation is just a series of questions that you answer, and you know your life, you know your business, you know your profession. So if you're talking to your experience, you're just answering questions that you pose for yourself.
Okay, but is it easier talking to 1,000 people than 100 people?
No, no, it's not. The trick, as it gets bigger, it depends on the setup. But many theatres or many auditoriums, when you've got 1,000 people, the lights are really strong in your face and you can't see people. So I'm an ambassador for a charity, a performing arts charity. And every 2 years, they have a big show at the Hackney Empire, a famous old theatre in London, in East London, that holds 1,000 people. And I go on and I talk about the charity. And when I do that, it's a classic example. I cannot see a single person in that room. So I'm talking literally to a black wall. Now, when I'm speaking, I thrive on seeing the response of the people I'm talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So you have no response. You don't know how well you're going down. You've got no feedback other than, if you're really lucky, you get audible laughter. And I've had that a couple of times, which is really nice. But that's the only feedback you can get, unless you get audible screaming and abuse and heckling. Luckily, I haven't had those. There are some venues where, I mean, I spoke in a similar theatre in Sweden a couple of times, Oscars Theatre in Stockholm, where actually I could see the audience because the house lights were on. Just the way we did it, it wasn't the same. It was a different type of event.
Mm-hmm.
So I could actually do engagement with the balcony, even, you know, in the circle. I was actually asking them questions and they were shouting back down, and that or a show of hands or something like that, and that was much easier. So for me, it's not the number of people, it's the setup. I was really comfortable with 1,000 people in Stockholm because I could engage with them. I could see them. I could get a show of hands. I could do something to create a conversation. When I speak at Hackney Empire, I always find it daunting because I'm talking to blackness, and that's harder. So it's not the number of people. I think it's the environment. The number of people is all in your head, for the simple reason I said that everyone only hears you themselves individually once.
Okay. So when you're going back to when you're starting off your speech and you're starting off your beginning lines, is it important to have a strong beginning?
Absolutely, because the first 30 seconds, people are going to decide whether they want to listen to you or not. So, do I, is this person going to engage me, or do I just get my phone out and deal with my emails? So, yes, I love doing what I call a disruptive opening. And a disruptive opening is where I turn the tables on their expectations. So, a couple of examples of that. In the past, when I did a lot of talks for women's networks, I used to start by saying, let's start with the basics. Men are better networkers than women. Now, bear in mind, I was talking to a room full of women. Now, I then re-invert, if that's the right term, the subversion. So I say that was a LinkedIn survey and study that said this, and here's why I disagree with it. But my opening line is contentious, and you can see people, all the women in the room sit up, like, what's he saying? Where's he going? This is unexpected. On a referrals presentation to salespeople, I start by saying, I believe the majority of people in this room are leaving business on the table untapped. And if you're happy with that, that's fine. But if you want to know why you're not getting that business, it's because you're lazy, you're complacent, and you're arrogant. Welcome to my talk on how to win friends and influence people. And then I go on to explain I'm not actually calling them lazy, complacent, and arrogant, but their approach to referrals is, and by the way, I'm going to share 7 mistakes with you. And if you don't think you're making any of them, come and tell me afterwards and I'll learn from you. So now I've got them listening because they want to prove me wrong. So those are 2 examples of what I call a disruptive opening.
Okay.
But I know they're going to listen to me. And that last example, that was a change in approach. So I used to give a talk on referrals called Leveraging the Power of Your Network. And this is how you get referrals. And I would deliver this at sales conferences. And I remember 2 in particular, both with large audiences, 250 or so people, many of them with a lot of experience in the
Mm-hmm.
sales world. And I would have been in my 30s at the time, and many of them would have been a lot older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And When I came off stage, each time my client said to me, "That's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted." But when the feedback came back from the audience, it was really mixed. 25% loved it, 50% liked it, 25% hated it, basically.
Okay.
That feedback's not good enough for me. And I tried to understand why. The client was saying this is exactly what we wanted, but the audience was saying that's not what we want. And my interpretation of that, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. My interpretation on reflection was that many of those people in the audience have been in sales for 20 years plus. And then here comes this relatively young guy on stage saying, "I'm going to teach you how to get referrals." They don't want to listen to me. So I subverted the
Mm.
talk from how to get referrals to how not to get referrals. And I'm going to share the mistakes. And I started with that challenge that you're lazy, complacent, and arrogant. And I'm going to show you why. And I did it with humor. And the first time I delivered that, the feedback came back, and it was exactly that audience. It was most of them were older than me. Most of them had been in sales for 20 years plus. It was exactly the audience that I'd been failing with. And 90% loved it because I totally changed the approach and I threw the challenge in their face.
Okay. But then, do you not think that that could be quite a big of a risk to do that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it's not the only approach. And it failed once. And that was because it was with a group of British printers on a boat in Germany who had been to a big print show. And this was their dinner event. They didn't know they were having speakers. Their coach had been delayed for an hour or two. They'd hit the bar. They were having a few drinks. And I didn't get past the lazy, complacent, arrogant before they were heckling me. And so they didn't hear the payoff that makes it funny rather than challenging. So that died a death, that presentation. That was a nightmare. That's the only time it failed. It can be a risk, but you don't have to have the disruptive opening. That maybe is for a more experienced speaker who's ready to do that, but you do have to have an engaging opening. That was one example of how to create an engaging opening. What a lot of people will do is they'll start with a powerful story. And I have talks where I start with a story. My stories will tend to be, on the whole, they'll be more humorous. I'll go for humor
Hmm.
and engagement. And I have a story that has a lot of visual humor in it that engages people. And that sends out the message, okay, this will be fun to listen to. I have a talk called Just Ask, which is about vulnerability. I wrote a book called Just Ask about vulnerability. That starts with a powerful and painful story, a tearjerker, if you like. And that engages the audience as well. So there are various ways you can start, but the bottom line is, will people want to listen to you? And that opening can be 2 lines or 4 lines. It can literally just be a powerful statement, but one that makes people sit up and take notice and want to know more. So it may well be that you start a presentation about working in the energy sector with a statement such as, "The energy sector isn't the sexiest place to work, but it's one of the most rewarding and powerful. But most people don't realize it." That would be a powerful start to a talk, because you're thinking, okay, well, why isn't it sexy? Or, why is it so powerful? And what are we not realizing? So it's getting the audience to ask themselves questions that they need to listen on to get the answers to. Now, that was off the top of my head, but hopefully you can see from that how that can work in that context.
Yeah, I do. I do. What is your tips then? Maybe one final question. What is your tips for anybody talking and then it's maybe not going so well?
Well, I think you need to be as tuned into the audience as you possibly can, which is why I struggle more if I can't see the audience. There is a caveat there. So before I talk about what you can do, the caveat is this, is that when you look at someone's face when they're engaged with you, you are making assumptions about what they're thinking, and you can be wrong. So very often, and I've experienced this, and I know other speakers have experienced this, I think it's quite common. You'll pick up people in the audience who look like they hate every minute of your presentation. They are sitting there slumped, in a slumped posture with their arms folded, their head down, and a scowl on their face. And then it's crazy how often this happens. They're the one that comes up to you at the end and says, "Thank you so much for that. I really needed to hear that." Or that was so useful. And what's happening is that's just their learning style. That's their way of concentrating. And similarly, you might have someone who sits there smiling at you all the time, and yet they're not really engaged with it. It's just they want to be polite. So you will make assumptions. But what I do is I do look for people, whether it's online, whether it's in the room, I do look for people who are giving me positive energy. And then I'm going to draw on them. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, first of all, you might be wrong. You might be misreading the room, but I would look for people who are really engaged with you. I gave a talk a number of years ago in Dublin. It was in Dublin for a group from Finland, a group of bankers from Finland. It was a rewards trip for people for the bank that were a client of mine. And I'll never forget this talk. I delivered a 90-minute talk, interactive, with, there must have been about 40 of them, 50 of them, and only one of them smiled. Only one of them gave me any energy at all. The rest of them, the faces were blank, like statues, just staring at me. To the point that when we got to the second or third breakout exercise, I said to the client, "Is this going okay? Do I need to change anything?" And she said, "They love it." I was like, "What, really?" Yeah, they're absolutely loving it. There are cultural things that come in, and it, if you work with Finnish audiences, Norwegian audiences, and obviously in the energy sector, Norwegian audiences quite possible. I had the same in Oslo. It's a cultural thing. They're not as expressive, typically culturally, as maybe we are in the UK. And anyway, so this whole room was like statues. And at the end, their next engagement was a tour of the Guinness Brewery. So when I finished, they all got their coats and their hats and they walked out of the room. And I talked about that loneliest place for the speaker when no one talks to you. I was in an empty room within 2 minutes.
Uh-huh.
They just went. And I felt so low. And I left and I walked past them queuing to get on the coach. And as I walked past, they all stopped me and said, "Thank you. Well, I really enjoyed that." The one point I missed there is that there was that one person, one woman who was just smiling at me all the way through. So what I did is I drew energy from her. When I was feeling frustrated and I felt I wasn't getting through, I would turn to her and I would talk to her. Not obviously ignoring everyone else, but you are looking to make eye contact with the people who are engaging with you. And she was my source of energy. So find that energy source in the room and draw from them. Don't be caught off guard by assumptions that people aren't engaging, because they may well be, but their learning style is different to yours or different to the one you would prefer. I would avoid trying anything. Interaction is important and people like it, but I would avoid trying anything that rests too much on it and be ready for people not to respond. So if you ask a question of the audience and no one responds, say, "Okay, I'm fine with that. I will carry on." So be prepared when you plan your presentation. Look for those danger points where if you don't get a response, it could knock you off guard, and say, "Okay, if this happens," it's crisis planning effectively. How am I then going to continue the presentation? So be ready for it. I've had a handful over 20 odd years of doing this where they really haven't gone to plan. And I have at times changed course midway, but that's such a tiny minority of times. And for people at the beginning of their career who are doing something for a board or something, I guess the one thing I would say is don't be frightened to stop and say, "This might not be resonating in the way I'm presenting it. Would it help you if I change tack?" And then ask a question and engage them that way and throw it to the audience. It's a scary thing to do, but to acknowledge it, one of two things will happen. One is people will turn around and say, "No, actually, this is really good. Please carry on as you are." And that can reassure you and let you carry on. The other is people will appreciate you and respect you for acknowledging what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And they will then want to support you forward. Remember, they're not there to judge you. They're there to learn. And so they want to help you to do the best you can. And you are better off addressing the elephant in the room and showing the courage and the strength to pivot openly and to acknowledge it than you are trying to pretend it's not happening.
Okay, I'm going to leave the conversation there on that positive note. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Andy for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.